I've played a whole lot of roguelikes in the last 12 months, and to wrap up this year, I figured I'd share with you all my personal favorite games I've played in 2024. These didn't necessarily all came out this year, simply ones that I've finally gotten around to play. So sit back, grab a snack, and enjoy my top 10 roguelikes and roguelites I've played in 2024. Number 10, Halls of Torment. Halls of Torment is a fairly straightforward top-down bullet heaven, or as I like to call, a horde-like. Like any other game of its genre, the gameplay and mechanics are rather simple, only being able to move and occasionally aim certain abilities. Standing out in the current sea of horde-likes is harder and harder every year with how popular and simple the genre is to develop. And while this game might not be as unique as other games on this list, I'd say Halls of Torment is one of the best horde-likes of the year. The aesthetics and the hack-and-slash gameplay are reminiscent of Diablo 1, which is awesome. There are plenty of characters to unlock, equipments are unique and open up many possible builds, but to me the best part of this game is its pacing. Most games of this genre tend to want to capture the thrill and success of Vampire Survivors, the game that boosted horde-like popularity in recent years. Halls of Torment was one of the few to do this for me. For the first few hours, I kept on playing new maps, finding new secrets and new characters while completing dozens of achievements every run, constantly rewarding me and keeping me engaged with even more content. While the gameplay is, in my opinion, a bit more repetitive than Vampire Survivors, the early hours of discovery and constantly getting rewarded for simply playing different runs was great. If I were to give some feedback, I do wish they would add more secrets and late-game content, such as additional encounters or events that players could discover during their runs, similar to the game Death Must Die. It would be great to also have more abilities to unlock. Additionally, I do hope the user interface and overall information provided to players improve, as the current state can make it very difficult to understand certain stats. Overall, if you're looking for a simple but solid horde-like trying to recapture some of Vampire Survivors' thrill, I'd suggest giving this one a try. Number 9, Magicraft. Magicraft is a top-down action Hades-like, with the twist being that abilities and weapons are craftable wands, taking heavy inspiration from Noita's wand mechanic. Players will encounter many spells, either passive or active, as well as numerous wands, each with their own stats and mechanics, allowing players to experiment and create their own weapons to rain serious chaos upon their enemies. Noita is notorious for being very complex and challenging to master. Magicraft, on the other hand, takes a small step back by reducing the overall difficulty and instead focusing on the chaotic nature to create very fun and satisfying gameplay. The ability to fuse and upgrade spells is a great and simple way to add more spell diversity without necessarily needing as many spells as Noita has, and the way wands can actually synergize with each other is a great touch. The choice of starting characters and meta progression also help keep the game exciting with a great sense of pacing. Each biome feels like a new world, there's a nice amount of enemy variation, each rooms end with some sort of reward which keeps the run fulfilling, and while the relics might not be super interesting in comparison to the spells and wands, they are a great addition to the overall gameplay. That gameplay can get a bit repetitive with how easy it is to pretty much just have the entire screen filled with spells, and I do hope they add more elites and boss variation. One aspect I myself wasn't able to fully connect with was the overall story and tone of the game, mixing a goofy and fantasy setting that didn't quite work for me, but that's just me. Overall, a very fun and satisfying game with great in-depth wand mechanics that will keep players interested with the crazy amount of ridiculous combinations available. Number 8, Returnal. Returnal is a third-person action shooter roguelite with Metroidvania and even horror elements. And ever since I've been releasing tier lists and videos on roguelike design, this game kept on being recommended to me in the comments. I may be a little late to the party, but I finally did play through it all, and I think it's great. Though I do have a lot of mixed feelings about it overall. Let's first get the obvious out of the way. As one of the first non-independent roguelites, the game looks great. Each biome is huge and full of details, creating a very immersive world. The whole campaign feels like a grand adventure in a way in which many independent games can't. The story is full of mysteries and twists that keep the player engaged much longer than most other roguelikes would. The house segments are genuinely creepy and very compelling, keeping me on the edge of my seat every time. The core gameplay is great, with crisp controls that feel overall very satisfying with the inclusion of great sound design and visual effects. Movement is solid, especially with the grappling hook allowing players to fly around at high speed for some awesome mobility. And the bosses are just fantastic. All of this to say that the core elements of the game are amazing, and single-handedly make Returnal a great experience. And yet, it's sad that I can't put it higher on my list because of many other aspects I thought could have been improved or done differently. In my opinion, most of the actual rogue elements were disappointing. Most artifacts or parasites are simple number adjustments, such as lower cooldown, more health, without any offering unique mechanical or gameplay changes. Consumables have interesting designs, but many of them are situational and don't always feel impactful enough for me to use instead of my weapon. I actually thought many of the consumables' effects should have been artifacts instead. Weapons constantly drop, but with only one weapon slot and no recycling option, they usually feel unnecessary. Chests are underwhelming, keys are frustratingly hard to come by in many runs, and the malignant mechanic usually isn't worth the risk in most cases. Maps are huge, which once again is great for the sense of adventure and immersion, but can take a substantial amount to traverse to the point of sometimes feeling like a chore. I think it's important to point out the negatives even in our favorite games, especially as someone who loves to talk about game design. But it is particularly frustrating in this instance because I think Returnal had the potential of being one of my all-time favorite roguelites if the rogue elements were a bit more interesting and if runs could actually feel a bit more different from one another. So if they do ever make a sequel, I hope they take even more inspiration from the best roguelites out there. Until then, Returnal will still be a very enjoyable experience and still one of my favorite roguelites I've played this year. Number 7. Withering Rooms. Withering Rooms is a 2.5D action horror roguelike with stealth and even Souls-like mechanics all bundled up into an impressively large adventure game. This game was probably the most surprising and interesting game I've played on this list. The gameplay is slow, simple, and in my eyes intentionally clunky as you're playing a young girl who is forced to hide and fight her way through a massive variety of different and unique monsters. At first, this game may not seem like much, but the more I played, the more the game kept expanding and expanding to the point where it felt like a massive adventure game. You start off feeling hopeless and weak, hiding from every monster you encounter, and utilizing equipment and tools found throughout your adventure to eventually become a true fighter or wizard. The roguelike elements are quite different from most other games. While Withering Rooms may market itself as an action roguelike, the game feels much more like an action horror adventure game. That being said, the roguelike elements are used in an enjoyable way. Not only will you be finding random loot and equipment such as rings with randomized stats, but the permanent death mechanic here is treated more as a hardcore death system. Dying will bring the player all the way back to the beginning of the current chapter, dropping all of their loot other than their levels and permanent items. This makes death and combat even more risky and frightening. As they progress, they will come across remembrance shrines that will allow them to pay a fee to permanently add more and more items to keep between deaths, which adds a really interesting and unique player decision mechanic. One of my favorite elements is the curse rot mechanic. Throughout the adventure, the protagonist will experience many horrifying moments, which will increase her curse meter. The higher the curse, the more disturbing the world gets, while also changing certain gameplay mechanics. The amount of work put into all the visual and audio changes caused by the curse is just fantastic. I would find myself wanting to get cursed just so I could see the changes, and it never disappointed me. There are a few things I wish were different. I think many UI elements could be improved for the map and inventory, such as better filter options or player feedback. I also wish there was a better fast travel in the late game. While the game is impressively big by the end, it can get a bit repetitive, and in my experience, I ended up becoming so overpowered that I was close to invincible, killing every enemy and bosses without much thought. And while bosses tend to look cool, many aren't mechanically very interesting, and the fact that you have infinite lives while fighting a boss makes them feel much less threatening. All that aside, I cannot deny how unique and surprising Withering Rooms was to me. The sense of adventure I felt playing through it was extremely enjoyable, and I would highly recommend it to anyone looking for a different roguelike experience. Number 6. Slice and Dice. Slice and Dice is a turn-based strategy dungeon crawler roguelike that uses dice rolls as its core mechanic. Players are in control of 5 heroes, each with their own dice. They have to fight their way through 20 levels, finding new equipment and promoting their heroes along the way in order to win the run. Every monster usually comes with a small mechanic players need to adjust to, almost like a new puzzle every fight. When it comes to roguelikes that use dice as their core mechanic, I find it to be hard to balance strategy with randomness because of dice having multiple sides, therefore a lot more randomness every roll. Here, every hero has their own 6-sided die that are all rolled at the start of every turn. But the fact that each die can be re-rolled 2 additional times, picking any desired result along the way, makes the random factor less prominent than many other games of its kind. The core gameplay is simple, and the different characters and mechanics are easy to understand. It's a fairly straightforward game that is simple to get into but hard to master, especially with a surprising amount of content. Over 25 different game modes, 128 different heroes, and 470 unique items is honestly very impressive and keeps the game fresh even after many hours. A lot of this additional content is locked behind achievements, as a lot of them tend to have more complicated mechanics that may not be suitable for new players. But the game does have the option to bypass all locked content, which is a great addition for a quote-unquote casual game such as this. There's also a surprising amount of accessibility options that guarantee comfort for any player, which is another great touch for an indie game of such. Overall, Slice and Dice has been a perfect game for me to pick back up every now and then, trying a new mode with new characters, which usually results in a brand new experience every time thanks to the vast amount of items and builds available. Number 5. Astrea. Astrea is a turn-based deck-building roguelike that, instead of using cards, also uses dice. I find it interesting to have both Slice and Dice and Astrea back-to-back because of how differently they utilize dice. While one is far more simple and casual, the other is very much not. Astrea is much more of a Slay the Spire-like game, collecting different dice to add to the quote-unquote deck, choosing a starting character, each with their own mechanics and dice, progressing through a map with different paths including shops, events, elite enemies. The big difference here is its complexity. Usually, when I talk about a strategy roguelike, I tend to say that the best games are ones with simple mechanics but complex strategy, Into the Breach being my favorite example. The overall gameplay is simple and easy to understand, but there are so many ways to approach each turn that it makes it a very tricky and fun strategy game. In the case of Astrea though, well, this isn't really the case. It is one of, if not the most complicated deck-building roguelike I've ever played. The core mechanics revolve around an intricate dual damage system. Purification, which heals you or damages the enemy, and Corruption, which damages you or buffs the enemy. Dice will have a combination of Purification and Corruption values, and can either be targeted at the opponent or the player character. This may seem as if Corruption is always a bad side of a die, making dice rolls very RNG or luck heavy, but this is where a lot of the complexity comes in. In short, Corruption can also be used in a positive manner, mostly thanks to the player's virtue bar. Virtues are abilities that can only be used if the player's health goes down. This means that Corruption can be used on the player themselves, bringing down their health low enough to use Virtue, use Purification to heal back up, and the cycle continues. But since players are limited to 7 maximum health at all times, this back and forth of damaging and healing can get very intricate, especially since all of these dice can once again be used against enemies instead for different effects. Instead of having the ability to reroll dice often, which you can still do in this game, Astrea's design revolves around multi-purpose dice effects, as well as a self-damage mechanic that allows a lot of flexibility, which is a great way to reduce the luck factor, making it less reliant on the dice you draw and the sides you end up rolling, since every high or low value can potentially be used for some purpose. This by itself makes fights and even individual turns very puzzling, with how precise and easy it is to lose all of your health with a single misplay. On top of that, each character plays drastically differently, with each having upwards of 30 unique mechanics. One thing to note is, since this game uses dice instead of cards, it is significantly harder to remember the effects of each symbol. Dice are just much smaller than cards, which all in all doesn't really help with the game's complicated gameplay. But for anyone who enjoys a bit more complexity in their deck-building roguelike, boy is this game fun and rewarding when everything clicks. With how technical a lot of the mechanics are, when used efficiently, defeating enemies feels very satisfying. The unique characters combined with the wide range of dice and multi-purpose effects makes every run stand out. And that's not even including the additional sentinels players can acquire that add more dice, the ability to edit, destroy, or even duplicate dice, the array of blessings, which are your traditional roguelike passive abilities, adding even more complex and interesting mechanics. I do want to emphasize that luck still plays a significant role in this game. While I do wish there were even more options for rerolling to minimize the impact of luck even further, I still believe that players who are experienced with the game will often find ways to work around it. All of this compelling gameplay is bundled up in beautiful visuals, a fantastic soundtrack, as well as an exciting meta progression where winning runs unlocks new characters and get the player closer and closer to unlocking the mystery behind this locked door that is constantly teased throughout the game. Funny enough, I actually think the first character available is probably my least favorite one of them all, which is unfortunate given how challenging the game can be for newcomers. Overall, Astrea is a fantastic strategy deck building game like none other I've played. While I wouldn't recommend it to casual players, it's nice to find a more complex deck building game done well with fantastic audio visuals. Number 4, Spiritfall. Spiritfall is a 2D action roguelike with a lot of Hades inspiration and the unique twist of it being one of the few actual fighting game roguelites. If you're a fan of Smash Brothers, then this is the roguelite for you. The gameplay is crisp, extensive, and super satisfying, comboing enemies with a wide range of abilities and different builds. And for a game with such an extensive core gameplay, it's surprising how different each run can end up being. There's a surprising amount of different ways to approach each encounter depending on the enemy, boss, and build the player is currently playing with. Instead of choosing different characters, players will instead pick from a range of weapons and aspects, each one feeling like a brand new character. Not only do the movesets feel great on their own from the very start of the run, but the roguelike elements such as the items or boons found will transform the already extensive gameplay into unique builds with tons of possible synergies. Similarly to Hades, players will encounter gods, or in this case, divine spirits, that each offer 3 blessings to choose from. These blessings are designed in a way to enhance the core mechanics and offer a surprising amount of variety and synergy between each spirit. The audio visuals are fantastic, each biome feels unique and immersive with great bosses, all accumulating into an amazing final encounter. As a fan of Smash games, I think Spiritfall did a fantastic job combining this unique gameplay with the roguelike subgenre. I do hope they continuously update the game, as I'd love to see even more content, secrets, different encounters, or even bosses, but as it stands, Spiritfall is one of my favorite games I've played this year. Number 3, Hades 2. Hades 2 is a dungeon crawler action roguelite, but you probably already knew that. The original Hades is still one of my favorite roguelites. Needless to say, I was very excited to see what Supergiant Games would do with the second installment and how different it would be. Well, I'm happy to say that even though the game is still in early access, in its current state, Hades 2 is one of my top games of the year. This time around, instead of playing Zagreus, players are playing as Melanoi in a quest to rescue her family who have been captured by Kronos, the Titan of Time. The story is a bit more serious than its predecessor, which I personally enjoy. Of course, the real question is, how is the gameplay? Well, it's great. I think they did a really good job of adding new mechanics while still keeping the original feel of the prequel. The gameplay is slightly slower but still has that good old hack and slash touch, even though Melanoi is more of a magic user. The hub area is once again filled with activities, including NPCs to interact with, opportunities to spend resources on permanent upgrades, and numerous cosmetic options for the hub. All of these features are once again great at keeping players engaged between runs. While there are many similarities to the first game, to me the most notable difference is how everything is just slightly more complex this time around. Dashing is slower and includes an additional sprint mechanic. Weapons have an additional 2 moves, each with the inclusion of Omega moves. Arcana cards are a lot more intricate than the mirror, and a lot of the meta progression now requires multiple ingredients found during runs instead of simply using one kind of currency. So are these additions a good thing? Well, I think it depends on the player. As for me, I'd say I enjoy both angles. I had a great time learning all the new, slightly more complicated aspects of Hades 2, but I can always see myself wanting to come back to the first game, knowing how easy it is for me to get back into with its more straightforward hack and slash gameplay. Hades 2 is also even more dependent on meta progression than its predecessor, which I think makes sense considering how much more important the story is. It'll probably take even longer for most players to reach the end of the game. It's overall more quote-unquote grindy, which I myself enjoy as it makes the adventure even more so engaging. The game probably has as much or even more content than Hades 1, which is kind of crazy considering that it's still in early access. One of the most surprising and impressive additions is the start of run multipath option. Before starting a run, players will be able to choose whether they want to go to the underworld or the surface, and each of these paths is its own complete world with unique biomes, enemies, and bosses, which is honestly insane. I still don't fully know whether this was really necessary and if I would have preferred to have twice the content in just a single path instead of 2 options, but as it stands, it's a very cool inclusion. I could see some players being slightly disappointed with some of the changes made, but one thing is for sure, I doubt anyone can say that this isn't a good game. As for me, I think they are doing a fantastic job with this sequel so far, and I'm happy they are once again listening to player feedback and updating the game accordingly. If I'm enjoying it this much already, then I can't wait to see how it will be upon release. Number 2, The Void Reigns Upon Her Heart. The Void Reigns Upon Her Heart is a 2D shoot-them-up boss rush, and if you've been following this channel, then this shouldn't come as a surprise. I won't get into too many details about this incredible game, since I made an entire video essay about its design, which you should totally watch if you haven't already. But as a quick recap, this game was one of my favorite roguelike experiences ever. The core gameplay is super fun, the roguelike elements are well designed, making every run feel different, each boss is unique, but most of all, this game has an absurd amount of content. Over 100 bosses, 700 achievements, 6 different modes, each feeling like a brand new experience, countless events, and much, much more. This game never ceased to amaze me, always adding new content every step along the way. I never got bored even after tens of hours of playtime because the game kept adding more and more things to do, constantly rewarding me along the way. And with how simple and enjoyable the core mechanic and gameplay is, I still don't get tired of playing this game. Without spoiling too much, if you haven't heard of The Void Reigns Upon Her Heart, then I would strongly recommend trying this fantastic hidden gem. Number 1, Balatro. Balatro is a deck-building roguelike with the unique mechanic of it pretty much being a poker deck builder. There are many great reasons why this game lives up to its reputation. As a deck-building roguelike, it is quite simple to get into and understand, but is definitely hard to master. Players start by choosing a deck of cards, usually some variation of the traditional 52-card deck, and need to earn a certain amount of points each round by playing poker hands. In order to beat all 8 antes, players will be able to modify their deck, upgrade their poker hands, and more importantly, acquire jokers, which are this game's passive abilities. As previously stated, simple mechanics with extensive strategies is in my opinion the foundation of a great strategy roguelike. Here, every joker is unique and allow a wide range of possible builds and strategies. Run feel different from one another and have the potential of creating extremely satisfying outcomes, which I think is this game's greatest strength. There is no better feeling in a roguelike than using knowledge and time to end up with an overpowered run that felt earned. One of the many reasons why The Binding of Isaac is so beloved. When you do get a powerful build in Balatro, boy oh boy does it feel good. Even though the goal of each run is to beat ante 8, runs can continue past it and go endless. And while many other games do have similar endless options, Balatro is the first in my opinion to be this enjoyable and addicting. Not only are achievements still unlockable even in endless mode, but numbers go big. I remember how satisfying I was hitting my first 1,000,000 points thinking I had a crazy build, until I learned much more about the game and reached numbers such as this. Exponential growth in roguelikes is very tricky to implement, as it can very easily lead to easy exploits and balancing issues. And in all my years of playing roguelikes, I don't think I've ever seen it be used as well and efficiently as Balatro. There are so many ways to double, triple, octuple points and yet still somehow feel balanced. Getting to that point requires not only luck, but a whole lot of knowledge. Another aspect that really complements the satisfying component is the audio visuals. The sound the game does while counting up points is so pleasurable, and with the addition of the score setting on fire when hitting high numbers, man, I never get tired of it. But even if runs don't always end up with monstrous numbers, the gameplay is extremely fun with tons of different build options, unique decks to start with, and different difficulty options for those who want a real strategic challenge. I'm glad I'm not the only one who's been enjoying Balatro this much. And if you enjoy, honestly, any kind of game, I would strongly recommend Balatro, as this is my favorite roguelike I've played this year. And there you go. I'm sure I missed many great games that probably could have been on this list, but I'm still planning on playing another 100 more roguelikes and roguelites next year. Let me know which games you've enjoyed that I've missed in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like and comment, as it really does help the channel out. And if you enjoy deep dive rogue design analysis videos, check out my other videos or catch me live on YouTube. Thanks for watching.